People vary widely in how easily they detach from relationships and friendships. Some step away with relative calm, others remain entangled long after the connection has become painful or unworkable. This difference is not a moral judgment about strength or weakness. It is the product of several interacting forces. Early attachment experiences that shape how we relate to closeness and loss, learn coping strategies that become habits, the degree to which a relationship is woven into our identity, and the social and material constraints that make separation costly or risky. When we translate the specific stories of individuals into general language, patterns emerge that explain why detachment is sometimes quick and clean and other times slow, messy, and agonizing. Understanding those patterns gives us practical leverage. It points to the skills, supports, and structural changes that make healthy detachment possible. But why do these patterns actually begin? And why does one person's clean break feel like another person's impossible task? Why people differ in their capacity to detach? At the most basic level, differences in detachment trace back to attachment history. Children who experience consistent, responsive caregiving tend to develop a secure attachment style. Securely attached adults are more likely to tolerate separation, regulate their emotions, and rebuild after loss because they have internalized a sense of worth and reliability. By contrast, inconsistent caregiving can produce anxious attachment, a pattern of hypervigilance about abandonment, intense fear when closeness is threatened, and prolonged rumination after separation. Other early environments encourage emotional self-reliance and discourage neediness, producing avoidant attachment, a tendency to withdraw quickly and to minimize emotional pain by keeping distance. These attachment patterns are not destiny, but they create default responses that shape how people experience breakups and endings. Beyond attachment, learn coping strategies and habit formation matter. Detachment is a skill that can be practiced. People who have repeatedly used avoidance as a strategy become practiced at stepping away. Their nervous systems do not register separation as catastrophic. Those who have repeatedly used clinging or appeasement to maintain relationships to develop habits of over-engagement that are hard to break. The brain's reward systems also play a role. Relationships that once delivered strong emotional rewards, comfort, validation, status, create neural pathways that crave those rewards even when the relationship is harmful. This reward learning makes detachment feel like withdrawal from an addictive source of relief. Identity fusion is another powerful factor. When a relationship becomes central to how someone defines themselves, when roles, routines, social circles, and projects are co-authored, separation threatens not just companionship, but the self. Losing a partner in such cases can feel like losing a part of one's identity, which makes detachment existentially painful. Finally, practical constraints, economic independence, shared housing, family expectations, and cultural norms can make detachment risky or socially costly. In many contexts, leaving a relationship is not simply an emotional decision. It is a logistical and social one that requires planning and resources. Even when we understand these roots, why does the mind often stay looped in the past? What are the specific psychological gears that keep us spinning in circles? The psychology mechanisms that keep people stuck. Several psychology processes explain why detachment can be portrayed. First, rumination and selective memory sustain attachment. People who struggle to let go replay positive moments and minimize negative ones, constructing a narrative that the relationship was uniquely valuable and therefore worth salvaging. This cognitive bias is reinforced by intermittent reinforcement, unpredictable rewards, occasional kindness, rare apologies, or fleeting intimacy. Keep hope alive and make it harder to accept a pattern of harm. Second, fear of abandonment and shame are powerful anchors. For those with anxious attachment, separation triggers primitive alarm systems that feel like existential threat. The resulting anxiety drives behaviors, pleading, over apologizing, and surveillance that paradoxically push others away and prolong the cycle. Shame, too, can trap people. Admitting that a relationship failed may feel like admitting personal failure, so people stay to avoid that painful self-judgment. Third, avoidance and emotional cutoff are protective but costly. People who detach easily often do so because they have learned to suppress or redirect painful feelings. This strategy reduces immediate distress, but also prevents the processing and integration of loss. Over time, emotional cutoff can produce loneliness and a sense of missed opportunity. It can also make future attachments shallower because the person has not practiced vulnerability and repair. Fourth, social reinforcement and external pressures maintain entanglement. Family expectations, community norms, and economic interdependence can all create incentives to stay. When leaving threatens social standing, financial security, or family cohesion, detachment becomes a high-stakes decision. In such cases, the difficulty of letting go is not a psychological failing, but a rational response to constrained options. Attachment is a natural human need, but at what point does this biological drive stop serving us and start becoming a liability? Why attachment becomes a problem? Attachment is a fundamental of human capacity. It is the engine of intimacy, cooperation, and mutual care. It becomes a problem when it is rigid, fear-driven, or identity-consuming. Rigid attachment prevents adaptation. People either cling in ways that erode their autonomy or cut off in ways that prevent growth. Fear-driven attachment, rooted in anxiety about abandonment, produces behaviors that undermine the very security that person seeks. Identity-consuming attachment narrows the self, so that separation threatens existential meaning. Each of these forms of attachment distorts decision-making. People tolerate abuse, ignore red flags, or repeatedly return to harmful patterns because the perceived cost of leaving feels greater than the cost of staying. Attachment becomes particularly problematic when it interacts with structural vulnerabilities. Economic dependence, lack of social supports, and cultural stigma can trap people in relationships that harm their mental and physical health. In these situations, attachment is not merely an internal state, it is embedded in a web of external constraints that must be addressed for detachment to be possible and safe. If attachment has become a trap, how do we begin the process of entangling ourselves without losing our sense of compassion? How to cultivate a healthier detachment? Healthy detachment is not indifference. It is the capacity to disengage from relationships that are harmful or misaligned, while preserving compassion for oneself and others. Cultivating this capacity requires work on several fronts. First, build emotion regulation skills. Practices such as mindfulness, grounding techniques, and cognitive reframing reduce the intensity of the alarm response that tries clinging. Learning to reserve anxiety without acting on it creates space for deliberate choices rather than reactive behaviors. Second, expand identity and social resources. People who can name multiple roles, friend, sibling, professional, and hobbyist, are less likely to experience separation as existential loss. Reinvesting in activities, reconnecting with old friends, and cultivating new communities provide alternative sources of meaning and belonging. This diversification of identity reduces the pressure on any single relationship to provide everything. Third, practice created exposure to separation. Small experiments, delaying a reply, setting a short boundary, or taking a weekend apart allow the nervous system to learn that discomfort is tolerable and that separation does not always lead to catastrophe. These micro exposures are the behavioral equivalent of building muscle. Repeated, manageable challenges increase tolerance and confidence. Fourth, address practical constraints with planning. For people whose attachment is reinforced by economic or logistical ties, detachment requires strategy. Building financial independence, creating exit plans, and securing social supports reduce the real costs of living. Legal advice, community resources, and discrete networks of support can make separation feasible and safer. Fifth, reframe attachment as a set of skills to be learned rather than a fixed trait. Therapy that focuses on attachment patterns, such as attachment-based therapy, cognitive behavioral approaches, or emotionally focused therapy, helps people understand the origins of their responses and practice new ways of relating. Group therapy and peer support provide social proof that change is possible and model alternative behaviors. Internal work is vital, but what does this look like in the real world? What are the actual words and steps we use to set ourselves free? Practical language and actions for detachment. When detachment is necessary, clear language and predictable actions help. Communicating boundaries calmly and consistently reduces ambiguity and creates a framework for change. Instead of dramatic ultimatums, use specific statements about needs and consequences. Explain what behavior is unacceptable, what support you will provide, and what you will not tolerate. Follow through consistently. Predictability teaches others how to respond and protects your own integrity. At the same time, practice self-compassion. Detachment often involves grief, shame, and second-guessing. Treat these responses as normal and temporary. Allow yourself to mourn the loss of imagined futures and to celebrate small steps toward autonomy. Seek social support that is not entangled with the relationship you are leaving. Friends, mentors, and support groups provide perspective and practical help. Finally, accept that detachment is rarely linear. Setbacks are part of the process. People return to old patterns, test boundaries, and experience waves of longing. Expecting a smooth trajectory creates additional shame when relapse occurs. Instead, view detachment as iterative learning. Each attempt teaches something about triggers, limits, and resources. In conclusion, detachment is a complex human skill shaped by early attachment experiences, learned coping strategies, identity investments, and social constraints. Some people detach easily because their history and resources support flexibility. Others struggle because their attachment systems, identities, or circumstances make separation costly. Attachment becomes problematic when it is rigid, fear-driven, or identity-consuming, and when external structures trap people in harmful patterns. The good news is that detachment can be learned through emotion regulation, identity expansion, creative exposure, practical planning, and structural support, people can reclaim agency and choose relationships that sustain rather than diminish them. Understand the general principles behind the specific cases turns confusion into strategy. It shows what to practice, what to plan for, and how to move from entanglement toward a life that balances connection with autonomy. As we wrap up, I want you to take a moment to reflect on your own patterns. We often judge ourselves for not being strong enough to leave, but as we discussed today, detachment isn't about willpower, it's about biology, history, and resources. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever successfully practiced creating exposure, taking those small steps toward independence, and how did that feel for your nervous system? If you successfully detached from a difficult situation in the past, what was the one practical resource or internal shift that finally made it possible? Your experiences might be the exact words someone else needs to hear to start their own journey toward autonomy. Thank you for watching, and remember, detachment isn't about closing your heart, it's about choosing where your energy belongs.